All
I'm
right,
gonna roll
so
while you do that.
but I would expect nothing less. Cool. So I'm August Brown. I cover music in the nightlife industry for the LA Times. Old pals and colleagues with Michelle here, and very happy to make our video debut on in the newsletter here.
Totally. So yeah, I feel like we basically came up with this idea together a couple days ago because you wrote this crazy article that came out. What was it, like a week ago? And basically, it kind of went viral. A lot of people were sending it to me, and you told me that it was the number one story on the LA Times for a long time.
Yeah, it kind of led the site for a day, and it kind of I think it was like one of the most traffic pieces we had like during the week, and which is really surprising for like a pretty niche story about a small after hours party that very little of our readership, if any, probably was familiar with. But yeah, I think that kind of spoke to people really kind of being really interested in like how the music industry and nightlife is sort of bouncing back from this, and the kind of risks that people seemingly are willing to take to get there and have some semblance of their lives back. And I'm sure there was also some kind of rubbernecking hate reading about young ravers who are had a death wish. And I think that's something that I wanted to push back on a little bit in the piece, that there also was like a real element of people that were desperate for their community, and they would kind of put it all on the line to get it back. And I thought that was part of the story too.
Yeah. So there's so much to talk about in context of this story, from like, what we were talking about before, like what is appropriate in terms of partying and pleasure right now, to the LA Times' relationship to the rave underground. But let's kind of backtrack a little bit. How did you hear about this party to begin with? Because I hadn't heard about it.
Yeah, it's funny. People have asked like, how did you know about this? And honestly, it like was less work than finding like a normal party. Like I got like a tip from a friend who just like sent me a text, like, looks like the ravers are back at it again, and sent me a link to the resident advisor ticket page, and it was scheduled for, I want to say, like June 12th or something, just like an very much in the middle of quarantine and lockdowns and everything. And I kind of, it seemed almost like there's no way this is real. This is going to be happening. This is like got to be some kind of a mistake. But then all the branding around the party was like, we're back, and it's like, okay, this is obviously, I can't believe someone's doing this. And I have been keeping up less than in the past with just sort of what's going on. But to all accounts, to me, it was at least the first one back that you could buy tickets to as like, just a civilian. And that definitely felt like something really noteworthy even for us. This was like, by all accounts, it was like the first ticketed concert in LA since the pandemic hit. So it was like worth going to on its own volition, let alone like kind of the conditions it was being thrown under.
And of course, it's like some dumb techno bro party. That's the first concert in LA. I mean,
Yeah.
I want to give a little bit of context to the party, Technometric. Like, I've been there a couple times, and it's kind of like the default after hours, like grimy kind of tons of random people. And they do have like good techno, I think, sometimes. Um, but yeah, I don't know, like, if they're like part of the like cool queer community of like rave underground that like I like to be in. Um so anyway, when you heard about the party, were you immediately like, I'm gonna write about this, or did you have some concerns?
So yeah, and this kind of gets back to what you were saying about the LA Times and its, let's say, mixed history in writing about the underground. Um, yeah, I mean, look, I mean, this is like, a lot of my community too. A lot of like good friends are kind of in that gray zone of throwing semi-legal parties in the sphere. I'm not in the business of being the fun police or busting up anyone's good time, and I know how much this scene means to you know individuals, to communities, to identities, to the music industry at large. And it brought me no joy to you know track down somebody and like flame them on the front page of the LA Times art section for doing this. Like, contra to, the history of the paper, like we're not out there looking for this stuff. Like, I think like after Ghost Ship, which obviously affected a ton of people in our communities, there was a real push to like just shut this stuff down because it was kind of a like, your child too could be at underground raves, like going to really dangerous things. And part of like what I wanted my writing at the time then to do is push back and say, no, a lot of people are doing everything they can to make these parties safe, to take every precaution, to like start coalitions like the LA Nightlife Alliance that like want to help people do it right. But the flip side of that is you've got to call it out when people are not doing even the bare minimum, or even just not throwing a rave during the middle of a deadly pandemic. Like you've really got to like, I think the flip side of like being taken seriously as party promoters doing the right thing is, you have to show up and call people out when they're not doing the right thing. So while I did have some kind of mixed feelings about kind of pulling the lid off the underground to do this story, I thought that like setting the precedent in print that no, kids, just because someone is doing this doesn't mean it's safe or okay or not completely endangering you and your loved ones and your family by going out to something like this. And yeah, I just like really wanted to set a precedent that if the underground's going to have the privileges of being left alone, it's got to police itself in some real capacity. And I thought, kind of more than anybody, I would give kind of everybody involved a fair shake, up to and including the promoter, who I did call, would have loved to have talked in a non-combative way about why he was making the decisions that he did, but he chose not to.
Right. So let's talk about the party itself. You went, inside, right? And
I did, yes.
a little bit. What was the vibe? How many people were there? Like, what types of people were there?
So I went pretty early on. I mean, obviously, like, I had my own sort of just like medical reservations about going. Like, I don't want to get COVID. And like, being in a room where the whole angle of the story is it's extremely likely you're going to get, you could get COVID here. Like, yeah, I had it on my mind. So I stayed for like about maybe like an hour and a half between like going inside, kind of circulating on the patio, walk through the inside, hung out for a bit, and then kind of after about like maybe like a half hour, 45 in there, went back outside and then was like talking to party goers on their way in just to kind of get their perspective. I think you're right. It definitely wasn't like a cool, queer, kind of agenda setting type of party. But if this was like a non-COVID time, it would have been a completely unremarkable, normal, after hours of, kind of stray techno fans. The system was fine. It seemed just like a normal, low to mid budget afters of like a like 100 cat kind of party. A lot of kind of just like normal rave kids. I think we're just like sort of hungry for events. It seemed like a pretty young crowd. I think it was a lot of kids who have like had been shunted inside and this was their community and they were really starving to get back out there. And
How many people were wearing masks?
Masks, it was pretty good about masks. While I was in, I saw a few people with their masks like pulled down to drink or to smoke outside, but generally people were wearing them. I saw them on the flyer and all the branding was like, there was like a hard enforced, like gotta wear a mask at the door. All the kind of obvious sanitation measures were in there. They had sanitizer, they had masks. Like people seemed to be doing a pretty good job of keeping their distance like on their own, but there didn't seem like anybody was like enforcing it. Like nobody was going around yelling at you if you were too close to somebody. And the DJ booth was set pretty far back from the crowd. There wasn't too much in the way of like plexiglass or anything like, in front of it, but it felt like if it didn't require too much work, they were doing it, but they didn't do too much to like, I don't know, like, yeah, nobody was wearing like, PPE face shields while they were like, doing the sound mix or anything.
There was a person at the door giving out hand sanitizer or something.
Yeah, like once you kind of got in through the metal gate at the front, at like the booth where they were checking in tickets, they had like big vats of hand sanitizer, and then there was more like placed around. Like, it wasn't like they did nothing, and the kids seemed pretty aware, like it was this weird mix of like half terrified to be out and around people, but they're half kind of giddily like not believing this was real, just like I mean, it did feel almost like an apocalypse movie where you find the other survivors on the other end of the city. Like it did feel kind of like that, of like, oh my god, there's more people like me out here. So like I mean, I personally um I didn't feel ultra safe in there, that's for sure, but the party seemed more like at least comfortable enough to be there and like do their best. But again, to stress, that's a whole different question than whether or not it is medically safe to be there. And the epidemiologist that I talked to for this story, who's kind of written pretty widely about COVID transmission risks, she pretty much fell out of her chair when I told her like what was happening in there. It was like, absolutely not. No, there is no way on God's green earth that a bunch of people drinking inside on a dance floor is anything approaching safe right now.
Right. I still want a bit more color, and I want some tea on the party energy though. Like, were people standing like more apart from each other on the dance floor? Did that change like the temper of like, or was it like super lit because everyone's been on lockdown for so long?
Yeah, it was kind of a mix. Like early on, people were, it was kind of like magnets with like the polarity of the same. They were kind of just like bouncing off each other at like a radius as they kind of move throughout the room. Uh, but uh, closer to as the night kind of rolled on, people did get a little closer. Like groups of friends would be clustered together. Like as the dance floor filled out a bit, people did get closer. I think like it wasn't like a normal sweaty rave where people were like up on each other and people like didn't look like they were talking to strangers more than they had to. But again, like you know, the virus doesn't know that. Like
And
no matter
like
what you're.
waiting like 6 feet apart at the bar.
Yeah, I mean, people. It got less so as the night went on, and again, like I wasn't there for like till 6 a.m. or anything, but like while I was there, people did seem to be doing their best to kind of keep apart. Some didn't, uh, but again, it was more like the circumstances of the event kind of precluded anyone from actually doing what was needed, even if people were doing their best in the moment. And like nobody seemed like that ultra lit. Like nobody was like getting hammered and ripping their mask off and being like woo. But like I don't know, like it was a weird mix of like total happiness and total tension, and you could see that playing out like in kids' faces. Like even when I was walking in, you know, kids would be like talking about like, yeah, like it seems like they're doing everything they can, but they were also like quick to get out of the line to get inside. So yeah, and like otherwise it was like a perfectly normal party, other than the insane circumstances people were there under.
It's just super interesting because so many promoters have been thinking about how do we throw a rave once we are allowed to again, but obviously it's still like there's a fucking pandemic, so what do we do? And like and I was talking to some New York ravers who wanted to do like a discussion panel and like what kind of precautions people would take, and like this is literally like probably like the only example where people
Yeah.
actually had to fucking do it. So that's really interesting. And I love that quote that you got from that girl that was like, I'm not worried, I've been suicidal since I was a teen.
Yeah.
There's this nihilism to it.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't tell if that was a grim joke or of a genuine sense of, raving to the grave. But yeah, like what you were saying earlier about like, this is clearly a live wire conversation. And I did, just on background, I did text a few other people that either throw parties or kind of in this industry and just ask like totally off the record, just like, what do you think? Is this an insane thing to be doing? And most of them, to some degree or another, said like, yes, this as it's happening is nuts. But I've been thinking about what am I going to do to get back there? Because like no one's going to be like this a year from now. Like, we're like people have to work, they have to live. America's already in like, demanding to be served their lemon pepper wings at Hooters without a mask in like half the country. So like, people are going to be getting back to work. Um, and I think like the big failure right now is, you know, California kind of thought it was ahead of the curve on a lot of guidance on like kind of what to do and lockdown early. And I know a lot of us were like pretty proud and like, happy to like feel like we were in good hands government wise, but absolutely no one has given any sort of timeline or guidance or best practices on how to have gatherings again. And I get it. You don't want to set the precedent that anything like this should even be like up for discussion. But the hard thing with the underground is it's a group of people that inherently want to push the rules and don't necessarily want to listen to authority about like what to do with their culture. And I think if the city and the state were to be truly responsible, there's a way to not have it be abstinence only as the only acceptable policy, but also give people some, like, I don't know, some semblance of like how safe, what is like, you're just like, if you're going to do a concert and you've accepted that premise, what is the best possible scenario to do it in? Because I guarantee you it's not what this is. But yeah, people do want to know, like, if we do an outdoor thing in the park where people are like, you tape off X's on the ground and you don't serve drinks, but you have a DJ, what is this kind of matrix of risk there? And no one's even kind of bothering to answer that question right now. And naturally, you see people just fucking winging it. And I don't want to see anybody winging it. I'd like to see some guidance about just, if you're going to do it, what are the just basic steps to do to like cut that risk? And I hope to see more of that in the future.
Right. And that's supposed to be coming when?
No one knows. Like, I mean, like I was walking back from sitting down in Grand Park this afternoon, passed by bars. They're all full of people that aren't even wearing masks. Like, it's like everything's like it never even happened, pretty much. And so, like, sadly, like the guidance is going to come second to just whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And I think that's like kind of the worst possible outcome. And I think that like the state and city need to get real serious, and which is part of why I wanted to write this article, is to show like people are doing this and they're just going to wing it, and without some semblance of like structure or best practices, you're going to get nothing. So let's get out in front of this and at least just like, I don't know, some kind of steering people in a better direction than just act like it's not real.
I mean, do you think there's some kind of stigma against partying and like nightlife? Because, like you said in the article, right, like people are going to casinos and church. Or is it actually that much more dangerous?
Yeah, well, it's. I think you're definitely right that there is a sort of like raver panic happening with this kind of stuff, where like the thought of like nihilistic kids breaking quarantine to go like take pills in a warehouse and come back and infect their families is like an easy media narrative to sell. And there was definitely elements of kind of devil may care attitude in the crowd, but yeah, like and part of what kind of made this show sort of so risky was that a lot of it was inside. Like, there's a way you could do a concert like that that's outside, that like cuts the risk like hugely and demonstrably. Like watching all the like the Black Lives Matter protests, everyone was worried that was going to be a disease vector, and it turned out to just not be. And like a huge part of that is because people were ultra diligent about masks and they were outside. Now again, like I'm not an epidemiologist, but this is just the best I can tell from my reporting, interviewing a lot of epidemiologists, is that like you couldn't pay me to go to Vegas right now and be in a casino full of recycled air inside with people, taking a libertarian angle on wearing masks. Like, that sucks. I wouldn't do that. But nightlife is like, there is like a moral panic around it that like going to church doesn't have. But yeah, if you're inside with like music and loud talking and people that don't want to wear masks, there's an equivalent risk there. And yeah, I don't want to shame nightlife anymore for that, but I also don't want to treat it with kid gloves just because it's culture.
Right. And like I know what you're saying when you said earlier that, you know, the nightlife community likes to push the rules and not listen to authority. But actually I also thought it was very interesting the reaction that the story got, right? Like I was like, oh no, there's gonna be a huge backlash, like people are gonna be pissed that like, you know, you name the party, and then, you know, thinking about the 2016 Ghost Ship article as well, which like people were, I think, pretty upset about, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Are you talking about the Times one where we went out kind of afterwards?
yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. So
Sure. Yeah.
I guess I just reread it today and I didn't realize that it was like 5 reporters working on
Yeah. Oh,
the
yeah.
piece. And it,
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I mean, no, you go ahead, I guess. What did you think of it and what was going on there?
You mean as far as like the Ghost Ship piece?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was. I remember at the time, first and foremost, just being shattered by that story, and I mean, I'm sure we all had friends. If you didn't know people that were in it, you had mutual friends with people that were in it and lost their lives. And I remember just being like, we've all been in 100 spaces just like that, and there, but you know, perchance could any of us have been in a situation like that? And I think there was sort of, at the Times in particular, we have a long history of, writing about troubles at raves, and, it had been sort of corporate kind of like Insomniac, Live Nation type things up until Ghost Ship. And then after that happened, there was the first wave of stories of just like comprehending the scale of the tragedy there. But then I think there's a second wave coming from the metro side of things about like, is there a world like this in LA? Could your kids be going to this? Who are the people that are putting lives at risk, like the people that put lives at risk at Ghost Ship? And I think a lot of the reporters that were covering it had good intentions and noble ones. I think like nobody out there is like just looking to harsh fun, but I think in the wake of something terrible, people really were trying to discover, are there unsafe locations like that people are going to unwittingly. But I think what was lost in a lot of that conversation is that people generally do their best, and they like, nobody wants a tragedy to happen at their rave, and if there are steps big or small to take, people will always take them, some more than others. And definitely some promoters are more concerned with like making a quick buck and packing it out over capacity than others. But on the whole, like, I think most people we work with and know want to do the right thing if given guidance and an opportunity. With this story about the most recent thing during quarantine, I was expecting to get flamed a lot harder from the underground than I was, but I was actually really heartened that everybody from successful DJs to other party promoters to just punters out on the weekend were pretty much united in agreeing with the thrust of the piece, which is that it is way too soon, it is not safe, and the underground, if it wants to have the leeway to do its own thing, it needs to speak up when people are putting lives at risk in the scene. And as best as I could tell from my reporting and from interviews afterwards about the risks of this, lives were definitely at risk, both within the scene and like, if you're like living in a group house and you go out to this thing and you bring it home to your 4 roommates and they go back and see their grandma in Claremont, you know, congratulations, you just killed a grandparent by raving, and like I wouldn't want anyone to be in that position. That's the thing. It's like everybody makes their own choices, but like the difference of like going to a party where you're worried about falling down the stairs versus a party where you're going to infect everyone you meet is a whole different risk matrix, and it changes the calculus. And I'm
Mm.
just really glad that the scene seemed to pick up on that in a way that it's not just about you, it's about everyone you know.
Right. I mean, there was this total, like, completely different reaction. Um, and I feel like, yeah, like the rave community is very self-policing in this regard.
Yeah, and I think the difference with like the big Ghost Ship story, the one that you were reading, was clearly done with the goal of stopping parties like that. And I know the reporters that worked on that story. I don't think there's like a malevolent like angle to what they were doing. I think they probably were trying to expose and stop something that from their angle they thought was dangerous. Um, but they were not coming at it with any understanding or like personal, not understanding, but personal investment in the good and the virtues and the like meaningfulness of what underground nightlife is. And I know my reporting at the time tried to kind of come at it from like, how can the city better enable promoters to be safer rather than how do we stop this from happening? But something like this party, there's just no safe way to do it. So I told the story in a way that positioned it as, ravers, if you think this is something that is safe and normal and an option to do, let's hear it from the leading epidemiologists in the country. And they were pretty uniformly like, absolutely not.
Right. Oh, but so did you sorry, I like got so stoned.
Oh no, of course. I'm jealous. I wish I was right there with you. I mean, so like I mean, you're having these conversations with people in New York where, I think like the pandemic was much more like in your face. And like, I know a lot more people in the music industry in there that like got it and were really waylaid by it. How is the conversation kind of happening there among people you're speaking to? And is it different than LA's?
Yeah, I mean, I think um New York just has a lot more like music venues that have really been a part of the community. So they obviously can't move or do anything and don't know as much as we do too, you know. It's just like this big sort of uncertain thing. Um, but I don't know, it's interesting, right? I feel like LA is so much more of this like warehouse scene.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so people can kind of just fuck around and do shit.
Mm-hmm.
But no one has, and that's the thing, right? Like I feel like there's this like acknowledgement that like you just can't. Um, and people are taking it really seriously. Like mask shaming is like the thing to do now, you know?
Totally. Yeah, and I want to get this like on the record on this, is that I am actually super proud of the LA scene for like how they've acquitted themselves in all of this, because like the temptation to just gun it and like do something like this is real, and people really are trying to figure out, under what circumstances would they do it again later. But like, just for the record and for like the audience of this newsletter, I am so proud of how everyone has like held the line, stayed strong on this, like advocated for each other and like done the best they can, but like with a hard backstop of, we are not going to compromise our community's safety and well-being. And like, just good, genuinely good fucking job, LA. Like I am proud to, in whatever way I am, like be like kind of an advocate and part of this community too.
Yeah. Um,
So what would it take for you to ever go to a party again? Like what would, like as a professional raver, like what circumstances would have to be there for you to feel like, all right, tonight's the night?
um, testing. Like if there was a way to show your test at the door and everyone has to have been tested,
Mm-hmm.
that would definitely help.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah. I mean, it's a shame that this is America and we're slowing the testing down as 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 has been suggested by certain people in power. But yeah, no, if there was a way to do like lightning fast tests of like go get it at dinner time, get it back in an hour or two, show it at the door from earlier that day, like I think that's not a panacea, but that would make me feel a lot more comfortable like moving a few bricks down the risk matrix. But yeah, like I know like some variety of like concerts will come back at some point, maybe like some like outdoor type things may come back first. But yeah, I mean, like I think like yeah, I totally agree with you. Until we get like rapid day of results done in like every neighborhood where you can treat it like I don't know, like you're testing drugs at a party with like a little like swab for fentanyl or something. Like COVID testing should be as like fast and like instantaneous as that. Like it's hard
Right.
for me to see going back anytime soon, but
I mean, I was telling you this already the other day, but to me, my dream scenario is for clubs like Bossa Nova in New York, which is like a really iconic like community space, to become members only with like just the homies and like the cute people, and then um, everyone else watches on the live stream. You know,
mhm.
I think it's this hybridity of virtual and physical that's just going to become like that's the way to do it. You know?
Totally, yeah, and I think yeah, that idea of yeah, we talked about this before, like exclusivity can mean a lot of things. Like one, it can be like just a knowledge base, but I think we're moving into like a trust based model of nightlife, kind of after all this, and that's going to be, um, yeah, I think it'll be good for the scene. It'll reduce, the kind of ceiling of like money you can make and sort of like career aspirations you can have right now, but I think it'll make for like, I don't know, like a safer, more like communal, more uh, friendly kind of nightlife in that respect. And to that end, like I get where bossa nova is like hurting and worried. Like if I ran a bar, right, that relied on music and like crowds of people, like I'd be devastated right now of like looking at the future and knowing like what's going to have to change to get back. And like I think a lot of people are going to have to figure out some new kind of models just to keep the lights on. And I'm really sympathetic. Like I have a ton of friends who work on at venues or on like the talent buying or agency booking side of things, and they're all scared shitless about what the next year is going to look like for their jobs. And like if people can come up with some kind of other model where it's like about a community that believes and trusts in their own COVID status, and I don't know what lessons to learn from like the AIDS years could play out here, but who knows? um, age years being, I guess, like the kind of prime of the disease. We're still in the age years, obviously, but like, um, yeah, like hopefully, like I have no idea what the answers are, but hopefully people will start to emerge with them because the vice grip of like needing to sustain the community is fucking real right now.
Hmm. I wanted to ask you something a little unrelated, but I'm genuinely very curious. Do you know, going back to the LA Times and like your coverage of rapes in the past, like how much did they cover it in like the 90s and stuff?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh my God. I have to go back and like dig deeper. I know we did do stories about the kind of like early years of Insomniac and uh, like Electric Daisy, even before Pascal Rotella got on board. I know there was like covering that as like a phenomenon. We definitely did stories on it because it was big. I mean, like people were throwing renegades of like 10,000 people out in like the high desert. Like, this was like a real thing. And like you look at the first Coachella lineup and like a third of it is, like Prodigy and like, Underworld and stuff. So like this was all kind of in circulation back then. I can't think of anything like offhand as like a good anecdote from like Times '90s rave coverage, but yeah, I mean, it was definitely like part of the music industry then, and like we definitely like had covered it. I think it was from more of a panicky, moralistic end than I probably would have liked to have seen then, but yeah, no, like that's a great challenge. I'll have to go back and look at our archives of that. Like, I'd be super interested to
Yes,
see like, when did the word rave first appear, like in this context, like, and kind of go from there.
right. And I guess my last question is, did you, come up with anything else from the story that you're going to pursue a bit more? And, I don't know, what kind of feedback did you get? And like, what are you thinking about next, basically?
So the reaction to this story, both like kind of within the underground and in our general readership, was like really huge and kind of. I'm not going to be on like party police. Like, I don't think I'm going to write a story like this again for a long time, if ever. Because I think the interesting thing happening right now is like the music industry, both above and below ground, figuring out what it's going to take to get back and like who's going to do it and when and how. Because I think like fans are starving for something to do. Owners are in dire straits about like getting their venues or their parties back up and going again. And like artists, I think are sick of being at home and they're sick of not having income. And it's like, and government is kind of increasingly, let's just say, lax about like enforcing what's still a policy of like no gatherings and like being at home. And I think there's a convergence of like people desperately needing this and government being unable or unwilling to like stop them. So how is that going to evolve going forward? Like I'm not playing dog catcher for like party promoters right now. I'm more just like interested in how people are thinking about how to do this and do this safely, and what people kind of need right now as far as like a livelihood and a community, and where that's kind of driving their decision making. So I don't know, like I haven't like thought of like too many like immediate follow-ups to this, but I think there's like such clearly like a hunger for what's coming next as far as music and nightlife and community in that regard. And I really just like hope at this point in kind of my career and like my writing and like, you know, like we've like kind of known each other's work a long time, that I think we're all interested in writing about this from a place of like, how do we keep the community safe and support it, because we all love this stuff so much. And, you know, for anyone that's sort of like wondering if like came out of that story thinking the Times is in the business of just shutting stuff down, like I hope to the best of my ability I can like, you know, just be a voice for good and like advocate for the scene as much as it is trying to, you know, make sure everyone's doing the right thing.
Right. Yeah, we have to find other ways to support this community, you know?
Yeah.
Okay. On that note, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Fun. This has been a blast. Thanks for having me on this. Looking forward to doing it again sometime, and best of luck in Seattle and the waning hours of that. That sounds like it's going to be quite a time.
The last days of the shop.
Last days of shop. Cool. All right, enjoy. Talk to you soon, Michelle. Take care.
Thank you.